You know they say blood is thicker than water, but sometimes the people who share your DNA are the very ones who'll stab you in the back without a second thought. I'm talking about betrayal so deep, it changes the very foundation of who you think you are. But here's the thing about rock bottom. It's the perfect place to build something beautiful from scratch. This is Emily's story, and let me tell you, it's one that'll make you question everything you think you know about family loyalty and second chances. Picture this: a successful marketing executive in Denver, about to marry the man of her dreams, a tech millionaire who seemed to have it all. But what her own sister did next will make your blood boil and your heart break at the same time. 6 years of silence, 6 years of rebuilding, and then one funeral that changed everything. Because sometimes life has a way of serving justice on a silver platter, and the look on her sister's face when she realized what Emily had built from the ashes, pure poetry. Stay with me, because this story proves that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living well. Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories about betrayal, redemption, and the strength it takes to rise from the ruins. The morning sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Emily Harper's corner office in downtown Denver when her world came crashing down. At 30, she was the youngest marketing director in her company's history, with campaigns that had won national awards and a corner office that overlooked the Rocky Mountains. Emily wasn't the type to flaunt her success, but she couldn't help feeling proud of what she'd built. Growing up in a middle-class family in St. Paul, Minnesota, she'd been the responsible daughter, the one who did homework without being asked, who saved her babysitting money, who got straight A's, while her younger sister Jessica got attention for being creative and free-spirited. The memory that still stung was from Emily's high school graduation. She'd been valedictorian, earned a full scholarship to Northwestern, and their parents were beaming with pride. But during the family dinner afterward, Jessica had announced she was dropping out of her senior year to pursue modeling in Los Angeles. Suddenly, all conversation shifted to Jessica's brave decision and her artistic soul, while Emily's academic achievements became background noise. "You've always been the smart one," their mother Margaret had said, patting Emily's hand. "You'll be fine no matter what. But Jessica needs our support right now." That pattern had defined their relationship for 28 years, Emily succeeding quietly, while Jessica created drama that demanded attention. Now at 30, Emily felt like she'd finally found her balance. Her relationship with Grant Wallace felt like the perfect capstone to years of hard work. Grant was everything Emily had thought she wanted: devastatingly handsome, successful beyond her wildest dreams, with his tech startup that had just gone public, and charming enough to make her mother actually approve. But success, Emily was about to learn, could be as fragile as morning frost on a window pane. The central challenge wasn't just about losing a fiancé, it was about having her entire understanding of family loyalty and trust shattered by the person who was supposed to love her unconditionally. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Tuesday evening in March when Emily arrived home early from a canceled client dinner. She lived in a beautiful loft in Lodo, Denver's historic district, and she'd given Grant a key months earlier. Instead of finding him waiting with takeout, she found the apartment empty. His jacket wasn't on the chair, his laptop wasn't on the counter, and there was no evidence of the romantic evening he'd promised. Emily tried calling, but the call went straight to voicemail. She texted him, but got no response. It wasn't like Grant to be completely unreachable. The second sign came the next day, when Emily's assistant mentioned seeing someone who looked exactly like her having lunch with Grant at the Four Seasons. "I would have said hello," Sarah explained, "but she was sitting with her back to me. Though I have to say she had the most gorgeous hair, just like yours, but blonde." Emily felt something cold settle in her stomach. Jessica was in town for modeling shoots, but surely she wouldn't. Surely Grant wouldn't. The plan was simple: surprise. Grant at his office suggest lunch together and put her fears to rest. They were getting married in 3 months. The invitations had been sent. The venue was booked. But as Emily drove toward Grant's downtown office building, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to discover something that would change everything. Grant's office occupied the entire top floor of a gleaming glass tower. The receptionist knew her by name and always waved her through with a smile. But today, the receptionist looked uncomfortable. "Oh, hi, Emily. Grant's in a meeting right now. Maybe you could come back later." "That's okay," Emily replied, already walking toward Grant's corner office. "I'll just wait." "Emily, wait," the receptionist called, but Emily was already pushing open the door. The scene that greeted her was like something out of a nightmare. Grant was indeed in a meeting with Jessica. But this wasn't business. Jessica was sitting on Grant's lap, her arms around his neck, their lips locked in a kiss that was anything but professional. For a moment, Emily couldn't process what she was seeing. Her brain seemed to short-circuit, unable to reconcile the image before her with the reality she thought she knew. Jessica saw her first. She pulled away from Grant with a startled gasp, but there was something else in her expression. Not guilt or shame, but something that looked almost like satisfaction. "Emily," Grant said, scrambling to his feet. "This isn't, I can explain." But Emily was already backing toward the door, her engagement ring suddenly feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "I think I've seen enough." Wait," Jessica called her voice, carrying that same sweet tone she'd used to get out of trouble as children. "You don't understand. This just happened." "How long?" Emily's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. Grant and Jessica exchanged a look that told Emily everything she needed to know. 3 months, Jessica said, finally lifting her chin with defiance. "Since I came to visit for your birthday party." Emily felt the world tilt sideways. 3 months. Jessica had been sleeping with Grant for 3 months, smiling at Emily across dinner tables, helping plan wedding details, acting like the supportive sister while systematically destroying Emily's life. The engagement ring slipped off Emily's finger with surprising ease. She placed it carefully on Grant's desk. "Emily, please," Grant said, reaching for her. "Let me explain. Jessica and we have something real, something I never felt with you." The words hit Emily like physical blows. "Something real. You have to understand," Jessica said, standing and smoothing down her skirt. "We tried to fight it, but sometimes you can't help who you fall in love with." Emily looked at her sister, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. "You're right. You can't help who you fall in love with. And apparently, I fell in love with someone who was never worth it." The weeks that followed were a blur of canceled wedding plans, returned gifts, and awkward conversations with friends and family who couldn't quite believe what had happened. Emily threw herself into work with manic intensity, staying at the office until midnight, anything to avoid going home to an apartment haunted by memories. The worst part wasn't the heartbreak, it was the humiliation. Everyone in their social circle knew what had happened. The story spread through Denver's business community like wildfire. Emily could see the pity in people's eyes, could hear whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room. Her mother called every day. "I just don't understand how this happened," Margaret would say. Jessica says they couldn't help themselves, that it was love at first sight. Emily couldn't bring herself to explain that Jessica had been systematically seducing Grant for months. It was too painful, too humiliating, to admit she'd been so blind. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday evening in April. Emily was working late when her phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "I know you're hurt, but I hope someday you'll understand. Grant and I are getting married next month. We'd love for you to be there." Emily stared at the message. They were getting married in the venue she'd booked, surrounded by the same friends and family who'd been planning to celebrate Emily's wedding. The decision crystallized with startling clarity. She couldn't stay in Denver. She couldn't rebuild her life in a city where every corner held memories of Grant, where she'd always be known as the woman whose sister stole her fiancé. Emily opened her laptop and began searching for job opportunities. Chicago caught her attention. Far enough from Denver to feel like a fresh start, but close enough to visit her parents when she was ready. The plan was simple, but radical. Quit her job, sell her loft, and start over completely. New city, new career, new life. It wasn't running away, it was strategic repositioning. But even as Emily began making plans, she couldn't shake the feeling that this betrayal had changed something fundamental about who she was. The woman who'd trusted so completely was gone. In her place was someone harder, more cautious, more aware of how quickly the people you love can become strangers. Chicago in the fall was everything Emily had hoped. Bustling, anonymous, full of possibilities. She'd landed a position as senior marketing director at a mid-sized consulting firm. And while it wasn't as prestigious as her Denver job, it offered something more valuable, the chance to rebuild her professional reputation where no one knew her story. Emily found a cozy apartment in Lincoln Park with exposed brick walls and windows that looked out over a tree-lined street. It was smaller than her Denver loft, but it felt like sanctuary, a space that belonged entirely to her. The healing process was slower than expected. Some days, Emily felt strong and confident. Other days, she'd catch herself wondering what Grant and Jessica were doing, whether they were happy, whether they ever thought about the destruction they'd left behind. The breakthrough came 6 months after her move, when Emily's firm was invited to a tech conference in San Francisco. She almost declined. The tech world felt too connected to her past, but her boss insisted her expertise was exactly what their biggest client needed. The conference was everything Emily had expected, a sea of suits, startup pitches, and networking events that felt like competitive sport. She was nursing wine at the opening reception, planning her escape, when a voice behind her said, "I have to ask, are you as bored by this as you look?" Emily turned to find a man about her age, with kind brown eyes and a genuinely amused smile. He was attractive in an understated way, not the flashy, commanding presence that Grant had cultivated, but something warmer and more approachable. "Is it that obvious?" Emily asked, surprised to find herself smiling back. "Only to someone who's equally ready to fake a phone call and disappear," he replied. "I'm Zachary Miller, and I'm supposed to be networking. But honestly, I'd rather talk to someone who looks like they'd prefer to be anywhere else." "Emily Harper," she said, shaking his offered hand. "And you're right, I'd much rather be back in my hotel room with room service and a good book." "A woman after my own heart," Zachary said. "What do you say we grab some real food and compare notes on how to survive these things?" Over dinner at a quiet restaurant, away from the conference crowds, Emily learned that Zachary was a venture capitalist who specialized in sustainable technology startups. He was thoughtful, funny, and refreshingly honest about the challenges of his industry. "The hardest part," he said over dessert, "is watching brilliant people destroy themselves because they think success means becoming someone they're not." Emily felt something resonate in those words. "What do you mean?" "I see it all the time. Founders who start with genuine passion, but then they get caught up in money and status and competition. They lose sight of what actually matters. And by the time they realize it, they've usually lost everything that made them worth investing in." "That sounds like someone I used to know," Emily said quietly. Zachary studied her face with those kind brown eyes. "Someone who hurt you?" Emily nodded, surprised by how easy it felt to be honest. "Someone who taught me that the person you think you know can turn out to be completely different when the stakes get high enough." "I'm sorry," Zachary said simply. "That kind of betrayal, it changes you." "It does, but maybe not entirely in bad ways. Maybe it teaches you to value people who are genuine, who don't need to prove anything to anyone." They talked until the restaurant was closing, and Emily realized she hadn't thought about Grant or Jessica once during the entire evening. For the first time in months, she felt like herself again. What Emily didn't know was that Zachary Miller had his own history with Grant Wallace, a history that would soon become very relevant to both their lives. 2 years later, Emily stood in the bridal suite of a small chapel in Evanston, adjusting her simple but elegant wedding dress and marveling at how different this felt from her first engagement. There were no helicopters or mountaintop proposals, no 3-carat diamonds or society page announcements. Instead, there was Zachary's quiet proposal on the beach in Michigan, with a ring he'd designed himself and words that came from his heart rather than a script. Their relationship had grown slowly, built on genuine compatibility rather than grand gestures. Zachary never made Emily feel like she had to compete for his attention or prove her worth. He celebrated her successes, supported her through challenges, and made her laugh every single day. But there was something Emily didn't know about her husband, something that would soon make their love story even more remarkable. 3 months into their relationship, Zachary had been reviewing investment portfolios when he'd come across a familiar name, Grant Wallace, the tech entrepreneur who'd tried to acquire one of Zachary's most promising startups through increasingly aggressive tactics. When that hadn't worked, Grant had attempted corporate espionage, trying to steal proprietary technology and poach key employees. The SEC investigation that followed had been thorough and damaging. Grant's company had survived but barely, and his reputation in the tech community was permanently tarnished. Zachary had been instrumental in exposing Grant's unethical practices, though he'd done it to protect his own investments rather than out of personal vendetta. When Emily had finally told him the full story of her broken engagement, Zachary had realized the cosmic justice of their situation. The woman he was falling in love with had been betrayed by a man whose career Zachary had helped destroy. But he'd chosen not to tell Emily immediately, wanting their relationship to develop without the shadow of her past hanging over it. Now, as they prepared to start their married life together, Zachary knew he needed to tell Emily the truth. But first, they had a wedding to celebrate. The ceremony was small, just close friends, Emily's parents, and Zachary's family. Jessica hadn't been invited, and Emily felt no guilt about that decision. Some betrayals were too deep to forgive, some relationships too damaged to repair. Emily's mother had tried to convince her to reach out to Jessica. "She's your sister," Margaret had said. "And she's not happy, Emily. Her marriage to Grant, it's not what she thought it would be." But Emily had learned to protect her peace, to surround herself only with people who added joy to her life rather than drama. Their life in Chicago was everything Emily had never known she wanted. Zachary's venture capital firm was thriving, and Emily had been promoted to marketing director. They lived in a beautiful townhouse in Old Town, with a garden Emily had planted herself, and a home office where Zachary worked when he wasn't traveling. More importantly, they'd built something together based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection. For the first time in her life, Emily felt truly secure in a relationship. But that security was about to be tested in ways she never could have imagined. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October, 18 months after their wedding. Emily was reviewing campaign proposals when her phone rang, her father's name appearing on the screen. "Emily, sweetheart." Robert Harper's voice was heavy with grief. "It's your mother, the cancer." It came back, and this time, Emily felt the world stop spinning. Her mother had beaten breast cancer 5 years earlier, and they'd all thought she was in the clear. "How long does she have?" Emily asked, already mentally canceling meetings and booking flights. "Weeks, maybe a month if we're lucky," her father said, his voice breaking. "She's asking for you, Emily. She wants both her girls here." Both her girls. That meant Jessica would be there too, along with Grant. Emily hadn't seen either of them since that terrible day in Grant's office 4 years earlier. But Margaret Harper was dying, and Emily wasn't going to let her own pain prevent her from being there for the woman who'd raised her. The night before they left for Minnesota, Emily was packing when she found Zachary in his office, staring at his computer screen with an expression she'd never seen before. "Everything okay?" she asked. Zachary looked up, and Emily could see conflict in his eyes. "Emily, there's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you a long time ago." Emily felt her stomach drop. "What is it?" "It's about Grant, about my connection to him." Zachary turned his laptop screen toward her, showing a news article from 3 years earlier. "SEC investigation leads to major settlement for tech startup. Emily scanned the article, her eyes widening as she read about corporate espionage, stolen technology, and unethical business practices. Grant's name was mentioned prominently, along with another name that made her breath catch: Zachary Miller. "You were the one," Emily whispered. "You're the reason Grant's company nearly collapsed." Zachary nodded. "He tried to steal technology from one of my portfolio companies. When that didn't work, he attempted to poach their entire development team with offers he couldn't actually afford to honor. I had to protect my investment, so I reported him to the SEC." Emily stared at her husband, processing this information. "You knew. When I told you about Grant, you knew exactly who he was." "Yes. And you didn't think to mention that you'd essentially ruined his career." Zachary stood up, moving toward her carefully. "Emily, I didn't know about your connection to him when we first met. When you finally told me the whole story, I realized the irony, but by then we were already falling in love. I didn't want our relationship to be about revenge or justice or anything connected to your past. I wanted it to be about us." Emily felt a mixture of emotions: surprise, confusion, and something that might have been satisfaction. "So when we see them at the funeral, they'll know exactly who I am," Zachary confirmed. "Grant especially. I'm probably the last person he expected to see married to you." Emily sat down heavily on their bed. "This changes everything." "Does it?" Zachary asked quietly. "Does knowing that I had business dealings with Grant change how you feel about me, about us?" Emily considered this. The man she'd married was still the same man. Kind, honest, successful in his own right. The fact that he'd also been instrumental in exposing Grant's unethical behavior didn't change who Zachary was. If anything, it proved that he had integrity, that he stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult. "No," she said finally. "It doesn't change how I feel about you, but it's going to make this funeral very interesting." Zachary smiled for the first time since their conversation began. That's one way to put it. The funeral was held on a gray November day at the same church where Emily had been baptized and confirmed. St. Paul felt smaller than Emily remembered, the familiar streets and landmarks seeming to belong to someone else's life. Emily and Zachary arrived at the church early, wanting to avoid the crowd and the inevitable awkwardness. But as they walked up the steps, Emily saw a familiar figure standing near the entrance. Jessica, looking as beautiful as ever in an elegant black dress. Though Emily noticed something different about her sister. There were fine lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, and a tightness to her smile that suggested all wasn't well in her perfect life. For a moment, the sisters simply stared at each other across the years of silence and hurt. "Emily," Jessica said softly, taking a hesitant step forward, "I'm so glad you came." "She was my mother too," Emily replied, her voice carefully neutral. Jessica's eyes moved to Zachary, who was standing quietly beside Emily, with his hand on her back in a gesture of support. "And this must be your husband. I've heard so much about—" Jessica stopped mid-sentence, her face going pale as recognition dawned. Emily watched her sister's expression change, from polite curiosity to shock to something that looked almost like fear. "Zachary Miller," Jessica whispered, as if saying the name might make him disappear. Zachary stepped forward with a polite smile. "Jessica, isn't it? I don't believe we've been formally introduced, though I certainly know Grant." At that moment, Grant himself appeared from around the corner of the church, looking every bit as handsome and successful as he had 4 years earlier. But when he saw Zachary, his face went through the same transformation as Jessica's. Confidence crumbling into something much less attractive. "Miller Grant," said his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Grant," Zachary replied pleasantly. "My condolences on your mother-in-law's passing. Margaret was a wonderful woman." Emily watched this exchange with growing fascination. The confident, commanding Grant she'd once known seemed to shrink in Zachary's presence, his usual charm replaced by obvious discomfort. "How do you two know each other?" Jessica asked, though her voice suggested she was afraid of the answer. Zachary looked at Emily, silently, asking permission to explain. She nodded, curious herself about this piece of her husband's past she was still processing. "Grant and I have a business history," Zachary said calmly. "His company tried to acquire one of my portfolio companies a few years back through some rather creative methods. When that didn't work, he attempted some aggressive tactics to force them out of business." Grant's jaw tightened. "That's not how I remember it." "I'm sure it's not," Zachary replied, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. But the SEC investigation was quite thorough, and the settlement spoke for itself. Emily felt pieces clicking into place. The confident, successful Grant she'd known had been brought down by her husband. Not directly, but through the kind of careful, strategic business practices that separated legitimate success from the kind built on questionable foundations. Jessica was staring at Emily with something that looked like dawning horror. "You married Zachary Miller, the Zachary Miller who destroyed Grant's company." "I married the man I love," Emily said simply. "The fact that he's also incredibly successful in his own right is just a bonus." The silence that followed was deafening. Emily could see Jessica processing this information, realizing that her sister hadn't just survived the betrayal and humiliation. She'd thrived. She'd built a life with a man who was not only more successful than Grant, but who had actually been instrumental in Grant's downfall. "Well," Grant said, finally, his voice dripping with false bravado, "I suppose congratulations are in order, though I have to wonder, Emily, if you knew about your husband's vendetta against me when you married him." "It wasn't a vendetta," Emily replied calmly. "It was business. Something you apparently never learned to conduct ethically." Grant's face flushed red. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Actually, I do," Emily said, feeling strength flow through her that she hadn't experienced in years. "I know exactly what kind of man you are, Grant. The kind who steals other people's work, who lies to investors, who seduces his fiancé's sister and calls it love." "Emily," Jessica said quietly, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "No," Emily continued, years of suppressed anger finally finding their voice. "I'm not done. You both destroyed my life 4 years ago. You made me question everything I thought I knew about love, about family, about trust. But you know what? You did me the biggest favor of my life." She turned to look at Zachary, who was watching her with pride and love in his eyes. "Because if you hadn't betrayed me, I never would have moved to Chicago. I never would have met the man who actually deserves my love. I never would have learned the difference between someone who wants to possess you and someone who wants to see you flourish." Jessica was crying openly now. "Emily, please. I know I hurt you, but nothing," Emily said firmly. "You made your choice 4 years ago. You chose him over me, money, over family, selfishness, over love. And now you get to live with the consequences." Grant grabbed Jessica's arm, his grip tight enough to make her wince. "We don't have to listen to this," he said, through gritted teeth. "Actually, you do," Zachary said, his voice carrying quiet authority. "Because this is Emily's mother's funeral, and if you can't show respect for that, you can leave." Grant looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Zachary's expression made him think better of it. He released Jessica's arm and stalked toward the church entrance. Jessica lingered for a moment, looking at Emily with an expression of such profound regret that Emily almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "I'm not happy," Jessica whispered. "I haven't been happy for a long time." "That's not my problem anymore," Emily replied, though not unkindly. "You made your bed, Jessica. Now you have to lie in it." As Jessica followed Grant into the church, Emily felt something she hadn't experienced in 4 years: complete and total closure. The funeral service was beautiful and heartbreaking, filled with stories about Margaret Harper's kindness, her devotion to her family, and her quiet strength in the face of adversity. Emily spoke about her mother's unwavering support of her dreams, her ability to find joy in simple moments, and her belief that family meant loving each other through the hardest times. Jessica also spoke, her voice breaking, as she talked about their mother's forgiveness and her hope that her daughters would find their way back to each other. It was a message Emily wasn't sure she was ready to hear, but she couldn't deny the sincerity in her sister's tears. After the service, as people gathered at the Harper family home for the traditional meal, Emily found herself in the kitchen, where she'd grown up helping arrange food and trying to process the surreal experience of being in the same room as Grant and Jessica after all these years. She was refilling a coffee urn when Jessica appeared beside her, looking smaller and more vulnerable than Emily had ever seen her. "Can we talk?" Jessica asked quietly. Privately, Emily glanced around the crowded kitchen, then nodded toward the back door. They stepped out onto the small porch where they'd spent countless summer evenings as children. "I owe you more than an apology," Jessica began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I owe you the truth." Emily waited, studying her sister's face in the dim porch light. "I was jealous of you," Jessica continued. "Not just recently, but always. Do you remember when we were kids and you won the science fair in 6th grade? Emily nodded. She remembered the pride she'd felt, the way their parents had celebrated her achievement. "I was so angry," Jessica said, tears streaming down her face. "Not because you won, but because everyone was so proud of you. Mom and Dad, your teachers, even my friends were talking about how smart Emily Harper was. And I felt invisible." "So you decided to make sure I felt invisible too?" Jessica flinched. "I told myself it was love, that Grant and I had some kind of special connection. But the truth is, I wanted what you had because you had it. I wanted to prove that I could take the most important thing in your life." Emily felt a familiar anger rising, but also something else, a kind of exhausted sadness for the woman her sister had become. "And was it worth it?" Emily asked. "Was destroying our relationship worth whatever you thought you'd gain?" Jessica's laugh was bitter and broken. "Grant isn't the man I thought he was. Hell, he isn't even the man you thought he was. The success, the money, the charm. It was all built on lies and shortcuts and stolen ideas." She touched her cheek unconsciously, and Emily noticed what looked like the faint remains of a bruise beneath carefully applied makeup. "Jessica," Emily said, her anger suddenly replaced by concern. "Did he hurt you?" "Not physically, not really, but emotionally. Emily, he's destroyed everything good about me. I don't even recognize myself anymore." Jessica looked at her sister with eyes that were bright with unshed tears. "I'm leaving him. I should have done it years ago, but I was too proud to admit that you were right about him." They stood in silence for a moment, two sisters who'd once shared everything, now separated by years of hurt and betrayal. "I know I don't deserve it," Jessica said finally, "but I hope someday you might be able to forgive me. Not for my sake, but because Mom always said that holding on to anger was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die." Emily thought about her mother's words, about the life she'd built with Zachary, about the happiness she'd found in letting go of the past. "I'm not ready to forgive you," she said honestly, "but I'm not going to carry this anger anymore either. It's too heavy, and I have better things to do with my energy." Jessica nodded, tears finally spilling over. "That's more than I deserve." "Maybe," Emily agreed, "but it's what I need." As they prepared to go back inside, Jessica caught Emily's arm gently. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you found someone who loves you the way you deserve to be loved. Zachary seems like a good man." "He is," Emily said simply. "He's everything Grant pretended to be." 6 months later, Emily stood in the nursery of their Chicago townhouse, her hand resting on her growing belly as she arranged tiny clothes in the dresser drawer. The room was painted a soft yellow, with white furniture and a mobile of paper airplanes that Zachary had made himself. The pregnancy had been a surprise, a wonderful one that had filled their home with even more joy and anticipation. Zachary was already reading parenting books and researching the best schools in Chicago, his excitement infectious and endearing. Emily's relationship with Jessica remained complicated, but was slowly improving. Her sister had indeed left Grant, and was living in a small apartment in Minneapolis, working as a freelance photographer and slowly rebuilding her sense of self. They texted occasionally, carefully neutral messages about holidays and family milestones. But Emily wasn't ready for more than that. Grant, according to Jessica, had moved to California to try to rebuild his tech career, though Emily had heard through business contacts that he was struggling to find investors willing to overlook his past ethical issues. She felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only gratitude that she'd escaped before his true nature had destroyed her too. The doorbell rang, interrupting Emily's nesting activities. She made her way downstairs to find a delivery person with a large package addressed to her. Inside, she found a beautiful handmade baby blanket in soft yellow and white, with a note in Jessica's familiar handwriting. "For my future niece or nephew, I know I have no right to be part of this new chapter of your life, but I wanted you to know that I'm proud of the woman you've become and the family you're building. Mom would be so happy to see you this content. I'm getting help, real help, therapy support groups, everything I should have done years ago. I'm learning to be someone worth knowing again. She with love and hope for healing, Jessica." Emily held the blanket for a long time, feeling its softness and thinking about the complicated nature of family forgiveness and second chances. She wasn't ready to invite Jessica back into her life completely, but she could acknowledge the gesture for what it was: a sister's attempt to show love in the only way she knew how. When Zachary came home that evening, he found Emily in the nursery, the blanket spread across the rocking chair they'd bought the week before. "It's beautiful," he said, running his hand over the intricate stitching. "Who made it?" "Jessica," Emily said simply. Zachary nodded, understanding, without needing explanation, the complexity of Emily's feelings about her sister. "How do you feel about it?" Emily considered the question. "Hopeful, I think. Not ready to forgive everything, but hopeful that she's trying to be better. And grateful that I'm in a place where I can receive her gesture without it threatening the life we've built." "That sounds like wisdom," Zachary said, pulling her close. As they sat together in their baby's future room, Emily reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The betrayal that had seemed like the end of her world had actually been the beginning of something better. She'd learned to value authenticity over flash genuine love, over grand gestures, and her own worth over other people's approval. The baby kicked a strong little flutter that made both Emily and Zachary smile. This child would grow up in a home filled with real love, honest communication, and parents who'd learned the difference between what looked good on paper and what actually made life worth living. A week later, Emily made a decision that surprised even her. She took a photo of the baby's room, with Jessica's blanket draped over the rocking chair, and sent it to her sister with a simple message: "Thank you, it's beautiful." Jessica's response came immediately: "Thank you for letting me be part of this, even in a small way." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a choice to leave the door open for healing, for the possibility that families could be rebuilt on stronger foundations after they'd been broken. Emily thought about her mother's final words to her: "The best revenge against people who hurt you isn't hurting them back. It's building something so beautiful that their betrayal becomes just a footnote in your story of success." Margaret Harper had been right. Emily's life with Zachary, their growing family, and the love they'd built together had transformed her sister's betrayal from a devastating ending into a necessary beginning. Sometimes the worst thing that happened to you turned out to be the best thing that could have happened. You just had to be brave enough to see it that way. As the sun set over Chicago, Emily felt her baby move again and smiled. Some stories didn't end with revenge or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes they ended with something much more powerful, a life so full of genuine happiness that the people who'd tried to destroy you became irrelevant to your joy. And that, Emily thought, as she felt Zachary's hand join hers on her belly, was the sweetest victory of all. If Emily's story of betrayal, resilience, and ultimate triumph touched your heart like it did mine, make sure to subscribe to our channel. For more incredible true stories about family drama, second chances, and the strength it takes to rebuild your life from the ground up. Every day we share tales of ordinary people who found extraordinary courage in their darkest moments and emerged stronger than ever. These stories remind us that sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the best discoveries about who we really are and what we truly deserve. Hit that subscribe button and join our community of survivors who believe that the best revenge is living well.